Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm ready to do my first impressions on this little guy. This is the GiantMouse Ace Riv. It's the newest knife from GiantMouse. It's the newest Ace model, and it's an interesting, compelling little knife. So, when they announced this knife, I think like a lot of people, I assumed it was just a shrunken down biblio. And in several ways it is a shrunken down biblio. The biblio is already a kind of shrunken down, slightly different version of the GM1, right? So this fits in that like family of knives. There's like GM1, biblio, Riv, right? But what's interesting to me is that they didn't just actually shrink the biblio. They made it a frame lock. They moved production to Riat instead of having it made in Italy like the biblio is. And it's got a couple of tweaks to it that, honestly, to me, make it more compelling than the biblio. So, I really like the biblio. Quick history, the first biblio I got, didn't like. The detent was just wrong on it. It didn't deploy reliably, and so I ended up selling it real quick right after I got it, just to make back the money that I'd put into it. And when I talked about that in a video, GiantMouse was really, really cool. And when I shared that experience, they sent me a brand new biblio to prove that they had gotten the biblio better, right? And they did. I own that biblio to this day. The one they sent me is excellent. I've got it in burgundy micarta. It's a great little liner lock. I like that knife a lot. This, however, I like better. Already, this is just my first impressions. There's still a full review to come, but I have been really, really impressed with this knife. And I know a lot of people were against the idea of GiantMouse having this made in China instead of in Italy. In my opinion, either way, it's not in the US. I know China can have some specifically scummy practices, but I've owned quite a few Riat manufactured knives at this point, and they have all been exceptional in terms of their fit and finish, their action, just they're really well-made knives. And so I was excited because, and I talked about this in my unboxing, I'll share the same kind of illustrator at this point. The knives that come out of Italy, not just for GiantMouse, but in general, with my experience with Italian knives, they have a different tolerance for the way they set a detent. And I related it to triggers when I did my unboxing, and I think that seemed to click for some people, and it makes make sense in my mind. So imagine, if you're into firearms at all, that a trigger is rated by how many pounds of pressure it takes to pull it, get the trigger to break, right? And so if Italy is making a Glock that is supposed to have, Italy doesn't make Glocks, but if they were, imagine, right? Italy's making their version of a Glock, and it's supposed to have a 4-pound trigger pull. That's what it's rated at. That's what the website says. This gun comes with a 4-pound trigger pull. In Italy, for some reason, the way they set their detents, if they were making a trigger, they might see it as acceptable to make that trigger as light as 2.5 pounds or as heavy as 5.5 pounds. Like, they see that window, from what I perceive, as acceptable. I don't know if that's actually how it works there, but just based on the knives I've gotten from them and the variety of detents, even across the same model, it seems like that may kind of be the case. Some get a really strong detent that takes more pressure to break. Some get a really loose one that's like, it'll just fall out of the handle. And they seem to like just let knives go out like that. Riat, on the other hand, every Riat I've ever handled has been remarkably consistent in terms of the pounds to deploy, right, if we call it that. Like, if they say it's going to be a 4-pound trigger, it might be 3.9, it might be 4.1, but it's right there, right? Their tolerances for that in particular seem way tighter. And I feel that on this, because, oh, there's a ground squirrel, because this knife just feels really, really dialed, right? It doesn't feel too soft, it doesn't feel too light, it feels good for the flipper tab, it feels good for the hole deployment. A lot of knives that come out of Italy that have a flipper and a hole, I find I would rather just have one or the other because it seems to be dialed for one or the other, but this strikes a good balance. It's really right where it needs to be, in my opinion. So I love that they moved this knife to Riat, because I think it's a better knife for it. Not saying I don't want to own any Italian-made GiantMouse knives, because I love the Grand. That's made in Italy. I really like my Biblio. That's made in Italy. And my GMF1 that I recently got, made in Italy, like it. That doesn't have an action because it's a fixed blade, but anyways, a lot of their stuff that comes out of Italy is very good. But I just think Riat, in what I look for in a knife, is better at hitting the target. Let's say that. So, let's talk about this knife in particular, and I don't need to go super duper deep because I will be doing a full review, but let's talk about where I'm at with it so far. So far on this knife, I have carried it about a day and a half. Both times, I carried it in my left rear pocket, and that's where I like to keep a secondary lately, and it's super comfortable there. This has a blade length of, I think, 2.5 inches. It weighs like 2.5 ounces. It is really small. It's quite light, and it's very comfortable to carry. It's moving over there. It's really, really comfortable in pocket. This, to me, will never be a primary knife. It's just not big enough for what I use primary knives to do and what I expect them to be capable of. But as secondary knives go, this might end up being my new favorite secondary knife. It just checks so many of the boxes that I really like. I've used it a decent bit so far. So with it being right before Christmas, as of when I'm filming this, I have opened a lot of packages lately. Been getting a lot of stuff in the mail. I've used it in wrapping. I've used it to open toys for my daughter. I've used it for like most of my normal EDC stuff, but just a little extra because of how much I've been doing lately. And it's been really, really good. I've even handed it to my wife a couple of times when she's needed to open a box or something. She likes using it, which a lot of my knives, she doesn't like using. She'd rather go grab a pair of scissors because it's more comfortable for her. But this being little, easy to hang on to, a nice slicey little blade, she's just comfortable using it. And I think that's a good thing. It's just very usable for like light to medium duty EDC stuff, and that's what I require a secondary to be. Then the things I want out of a secondary are for it to be really comfortable to carry. I want it to be small and easy to have on me in a place that's not where my primary goes, right? I want it to fit in my hand well, which this does super well with this forward finger choil, which to me feels a little bigger than the one on the Biblio, and then this choil, and then this like nice landing spot for the rest of my hand. I just get an awesome grip on here. My thumb lands right onto the jimping, which is the least aggressive GiantMouse jimping I've ever felt, and it feels great. It's just kind of like an indexing point rather than like a real traction-y spot. I like that. This is a tiny knife. I don't need like aggressive jimping, right? I just need a little spot for my thumb to land. I like that. The spine is crowned. It's doing all the things that I like in a GiantMouse knife. It feels great in hand. In fact, I think these ergos, for me, feel even better than the Biblio does. And the Biblio is a knife that I pretty much consider a secondary as well. I've carried it as a primary a couple of times, but usually goes as a secondary. So if I'm comparing this with the Biblio as like which one is the better secondary knife for me, Biblio has a little extra blade length, but it's a lot thicker in pocket, and this just feels a little more comfortable in my hand. Not a ton more comfortable, but a little bit. I like the way I grip this knife, and so I think this knife is probably the more compelling offering to me if I'm comparing them head-to-head. Maybe I'll do kind of a head-to-head comparison when I'm done reviewing this between it and the Biblio. I think that would be interesting. But yeah, I love the way they've finished this green micarta. They always do a great job with green micarta at GiantMouse. I love the action on it. It's not like a super drop-shutty knife because it's a tiny little blade, but when I middle finger flick this knife especially, I really enjoy fidgeting with it. It's a fun knife to fidget with. And a lot of secondary knives are less fun to play with than primaries. This one is quite good. I could carry kind of a boring to fidget with primary if this is the secondary in my pocket, because then I still have something to play with, right? So like it's doing a lot of really good things. Yeah, I find it really interesting. One thing as well, in my unboxing, I said I was like 98% sure it was M390. I was wrong. This one is in LMAX, and it is stamped inside the scales like they've been doing recently on Ace line knives. It's just hard for me to see. I can't even really see it that well. I'm sure if I took it apart it would be plain as day, but it's just hard to see in there. So it's in LMAX, which is fine by me. I really like LMAX. The Grand is in LMAX, and I adore the Grand. I've had great experience with LMAX steel in general, and so I'm cool with it. I consider it a premium steel. So yeah, LMAX, micarta, titanium frame lock with an over travel stop and lock bar insert, little titanium backspacer, loop over, wire, deep carry clip. It's all like the things I want, especially out of a secondary. Plus, this blade stock is fairly thin. I really like that they didn't go with an overly thick blade stock on here, because with that full flat grind and it being this nice thin stock, it's just, I mean, it's a good little cutter. It does really well at any cutting task that I've done with it so far. It's on center, it locks up well. I do have to be a little sensitive to not putting my finger on the lock bar when I'm using the flipper tab. If I press on that too hard, I notice I slip off every now and then. But if I just choke my fingers back to kind of being all on the clip, it never fails. And I middle finger flick it most of the time anyways. But yeah, this knife is really, really good. I'm looking forward to carrying it more and using it more in preparation for my full review, because this is one that I've just been plain enjoying. I've been enjoying it a lot. That squirrel is pushing down a bunch of rocks. Anyways, this is the GiantMouse Ace Riv, and it is awesome. I want to thank GiantMouse again for sending me this knife. They were very cool to provide it for the channel for me to review, so I genuinely appreciate that. And one thing I also appreciate about them, I usually communicate with Jim over at GiantMouse Knives, and he's great. Awesome dude. They are totally cool with me being very honest in my reviews, even if they send me something like this. And that's very important to me to keep my integrity in the channel, and so I appreciate companies like them who welcome feedback, whether it be positive or negative, from someone like me who they've just sent a knife to. That's really, really cool of them, so kudos to them for that. And I like how much they seem to listen to what people are saying. They seem to be engaged with it, and it's a group of great guys over there. So there you have it. That'll be my first impressions on the Riv. Appreciate you guys for watching. I'll see you on the next one.